a Werewolf Shifter romance audiobook. In the shadowed heart of the Silver Hollow, where moonlight drips like liquid mercury through ancient pines, and the wind itself carries the low, mournful song of wolves long gone, a girl once believed she belonged. Chapter 1. The night the moon forgot her name. The night air tasted of iron and pine sap, sharp enough to cut the tongue. Silver Hollow's sacred clearing lay bathed in a moon so bright it bleached the color from everything, turning the watching pack into statues of shadow and frost. Amie stood barefoot at its heart, toes curled into cold earth that remembered every wolf who had ever been claimed here. Her pulse thundered louder than the drums that had fallen silent minutes ago. 18. Tonight the moon would look inside her and name her wolf, or it would look and find nothing at all. She felt the shift before she heard it. A ripple through the crowd, 100 heads turning as one toward the tree line. Then he stepped into the light. James. He moved like the forest itself had decided to take human shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair black as spilled ink, eyes molten gold and fixed only on her. The Alpha's son. The boy who had once carried her across a swollen river when she was 12 and laughing. The boy whose smile had lived behind her eyelids for years. Now he looked carved from something harder than mercy. The bond snapped into place so violently her knees almost bucked. A golden thread, invisible, unbreakable, yanked tight between her ribs and his. Mate! The word roared through her blood, through every watching wolf, through the moon itself. James crossed the clearing in slow, deliberate strides. The pack parted for him the way water parts for a blade. When he stopped, barely a breath separated them. Heat rolled off his skin, cedar and storm and wild, dark things. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, rose again. "Amie," he said, low enough that only she could taste his voice. She couldn't speak, could only feel the thread singing, pulling, begging her to close the distance. His hand lifted, slow as sunrise, knuckles brushing the line of her jaw. The touch burned. Her lips parted on a soundless inhale, and the scent of him flooded her lungs until there was no room for anything else. Then his fingers curled, nails lengthening just enough to prick her skin, and his expression shifted. Something cold and ancient slid behind those gold eyes. "I feel it," he murmured, voice rough as splintered wood. "I feel you." A pause. Heavy as judgment. "But you're empty." The words struck harder than claws. Empty. The pack inhaled as one. Someone whimpered. Amie felt the thread tremble, fray. James stepped back, letting moonlight fall between them like a guillotine. "I, James Calder of Silver Hollow, reject you, Amie Vale, as my mate." His voice carried to the edges of the clearing, clear and merciless. "You have no wolf. You never will. You are not fit to stand at my side." The bond did not break gently. It tore. A white-hot ripping that started behind her sternum and exploded outward, flinging her to her knees. She tasted blood where she bit her tongue to keep from screaming. James's face twisted, just once. Pain or regret, she couldn't tell, before the alpha mask locked back into place. "Go," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "Before the moon sees you and pities you." She couldn't breathe, couldn't see through the tears that refused to fall, because tears would mean he'd won completely. Around her, the pack began to turn away, some with sorrow, most with the quiet cruelty of survival. Her mother's sob cracked the night somewhere behind her, but no one stepped forward, not even her father. Amie forced herself upright. The cold earth bit into her soles like teeth. She looked at James one last time, memorized the hard line of his jaw, the way the moon loved the angles of his face even now. Memorized the exact shade of gold that had just destroyed her. Then she ran. Branches whipped her skin, drawing blood she didn't feel. The forest blurred into streaks of silver and black. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out somewhere beyond the border stones, until the scent of Silver Hollow thinned and the city's distant glow stained the horizon. Only then did she let the first sound escape, half howl, half sob, raw and broken and human. The moon hung above her, full and pitiless, and for the first time in her life, it offered her nothing at all. Chapter 2. City Lights That Never Learned Her Howl. The rain came down in needles, sharp enough to sting skin that had forgotten how to heal fast. Amie stood on the cracked balcony of her fourth-floor walk-up, fingers curled around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold hours ago. Below her, the city bled neon, red, violet, acid green, into puddles that reflected nothing of the moon she refused to look for. 3 years. 1,095 nights since she'd run barefoot across the border stones, with James's rejection still burning in her throat like swallowed fire. She wore the human world like an ill-fitting coat, jeans that hid the scars on her calves from that first frantic flight, boots that muffled the memory of Earth under claws she'd never grown, a name tag at the diner that read Amie, because no one here could pronounce the softness of Amie Vale. Inside her chest, the place where the bond had been ripped out still ached when the weather turned cold. A hollow cavity, cauterized and silent. Yet tonight the ache felt different, restless. She set the mug down, wiped steam from the sliding door, and stared at her reflection. 21 now, cheekbones sharper, mouth set harder, eyes the color of storm clouds over pine. The girl who had once begged the moon for a wolf looked back at her with something dangerous flickering behind the gray. A low thrum started beneath her ribs. Not pain, not memory. Something older. Something that stretched and tasted the air and did not like the stench of exhaust and loneliness. Amie pressed a palm to the glass. Her breath fogged it, then cleared, then fogged again. Faster. Her pulse kicked, sudden and wild. The wolf. For the first time since the clearing, the wolf moved. Not a shift. Not yet. Just a turning over in the dark, a slow uncoiling of muscle and fang that had been drugged by grief and city smog for too long. A single amber spark lit behind her eyes in the reflection. There and gone so quickly, she almost believed she'd imagined it. Her knees buckled. She caught the railing, metal ice-cold under her grip. Knuckles whitening. The rain hissed against the fire escape, against her hair, against the places on her neck where James's breath had once lingered like a brand. She hated that she still remembered exactly how it felt. Downstairs, a siren wailed past, red, blue, painting her skin in colors no forest had ever worn. She closed her eyes and let the city scream for her, because she had learned not to. The diner shift started in 40 minutes. She would smile at strangers who smelled of cheap cologne and fried onions, pour coffee that tasted like ash, pocket tips that barely covered rent, and pretend the hollow place inside her didn't echo every time someone said "miss" in a voice that wasn't his. But tonight, the pretending cracked along the edges. Because the wolf had moved. Because the wolf remembered moonlight. Amie pushed off the railing, went inside, and shut the door on the rain. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla candle, and the lie she told herself every morning, that she was fine. She peeled off the soaked hoodie, let it fall with a wet slap to the linoleum. Her skin prickled, too tight, too alive. She crossed to the tiny bathroom, flicked on the harsh bulb, and stared at herself in the mirror above the sink. Water dripped from her lashes. Her chest rose and fell too fast. "Come on," she whispered to the reflection, voice raw from disuse. "If you're in there, show me." Nothing. She gripped the porcelain until it creaked. "I said show me." A pulse. Deep, deliberate. Like a heartbeat answering back. Her vision flickered gold at the edges. The overhead light buzzed, then popped, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the city's glow through the frosted window. Amie's breath clouded in front of her. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. She laughed, one sharp, broken sound that tasted like freedom and terror. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline, low and possessive, the way James's growl had once rolled through her bones. She lifted her chin, met her own eyes in the fractured dark, and for the first time in 3 years let herself want. Not him. Never him again. But the wolf. The power. The life she had been told she could never have. Tomorrow she would go to work and smile and pretend. Tonight, she stood dripping and shaking and gloriously, impossibly alive, while something ancient stretched awake inside her chest and whispered a single word against the cage of her ribs. Soon. The city lights kept bleeding color across the walls, but for one trembling moment, Amie could have sworn they flickered silver. Chapter 3. The Alpha Who Knocked on a Human Door. The knock came at 11:47 p.m., 3 measured raps that struck the thin wood like the slow beat of a war drum. Amie froze halfway across the living room, one hand still clutching the damp dish towel she'd been using to wipe down the counter. The air in the apartment changed, thickened, grew teeth. Cedar and wintergreen and storm-chased snow poured under the door and wrapped around her throat like a living thing. Her pulse answered before her mind did. Hard. Fast. Territorial. She hadn't smelled wolf in 3 years. Not once. Not even in her dreams. The knock came again, patient, inevitable. She dropped the towel, padded barefoot to the door, and pressed her palm flat against the peeling paint. Heat bled through from the other side, steady, male, overwhelming. Her wolf, the one that had only just begun to stir, rose up inside her chest, hackles raised, lips peeling back from fangs that didn't yet exist in the human world. Amie slid the chain free with fingers that should have trembled, but didn't. She opened the door 6 inches and looked up, and up, into eyes the color of glacier rivers under moonlight. Finlay. He filled the narrow hallway like midnight-made flesh. Black coat dusted with rain, shoulders broad enough to block the sickly fluorescent light, dark hair pushed back from a face that looked carved from granite and secrets. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against bronze skin. His scent slammed into her again, richer now, wilder, laced with something that made her knees want to soften and her spine want to straighten all at once. He didn't smile. He simply let his gaze travel over her face, slow and deliberate, as though he had every right to drink her in. Amie Vale, he said, and the way he shaped her name was a claiming all by itself. Deep, rough, northern-edged. You're a hard woman to find. Her fingers tightened on the door. Most people take that as a hint. One corner of his mouth lifted, barely. I'm not most people. Behind him, the hallway stretched empty, yet the building felt suddenly full of watchful shadows. She scented them now, 2, maybe 3 others, holding position at the stairwells, leashed power humming like a drawn bowstring. His guard, his pack. Her wolf snarled silently, pressing against the inside of her skin. Finlay's gaze dropped to her white-knuckled grip on the door, then lifted again. Something softened, just a fraction, in the hard lines of his face. I'm not here to drag you back, little storm. His voice dropped, velvet over steel. I'm here to ask you to come home. The words hit her like a slap and a caress at once. Home. The concept tasted like blood and pine needles, and James's rejection all over again. I don't have a home, she said, and the coldness in her own voice surprised even her. Finlay stepped forward, not into her apartment, never crossing the threshold without permission, but close enough that the heat radiating off his chest brushed her damp skin through the thin cotton of her tank top, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his stare. You have a wolf, he said quietly. I felt her the moment I crossed the city limits. She's magnificent, and she's suffocating in this place. Amie's breath caught. The spark that had flickered in the bathroom mirror 2 nights ago flared now, bright and hot and furious. She felt her eyes flash amber, just for a heartbeat, and saw the answering gleam in his. He inhaled, slow and deliberate, as though tasting her on the air. You're latent, not gone. There's a difference, and I run a pack that doesn't give a damn about bloodlines or traditions that leave girls bleeding in the dirt. His hand rose, palm open, hovering an inch from her cheek, asking, never taking. Rainwater still clung to his knuckles. One drop slid down the inside of his wrist and vanished beneath the cuff of his coat. "I can't promise you safety," he continued, voice low enough to bruise. "But I can promise you a place where no one will ever look at you and call you empty again." The hallway light flickered. Somewhere below, a door slammed. The everyday sounds of human life felt thin and far away, like noises from another planet. Amie's heart pounded so hard, she was certain he could see it jumping beneath her skin. She should slam the door, should tell him to leave, should protect the fragile shell she'd built around the broken pieces James had left behind. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What's your name?" "Finlay Blackthorn." His lashes lowered, just enough to hood the river blue of his eyes. "Alpha of the Blackthorn pack, and I've been dreaming about the sound of your growl for 3 moons straight." The confession hung between them, raw and impossible. Her wolf surged forward, pressing against the bars of a cage that suddenly felt paper-thin. Amie's lips parted on a shaky exhale that tasted of cedar and winter, and the first hint of snow on the wind. Finlay's gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, returned to her eyes. The space between them shimmered with restraint so fierce it felt like its own kind of touch. "Come outside with me," he said, softer than the rain. "Just onto the balcony. Let the night air find you again. 1 breath. If you hate it, I'll walk away and you'll never see me again." He didn't move back, didn't crowd her, simply waited, hand still open, palm scarred and steady, offering her the choice James had stolen all those years ago. Amie looked at that hand and felt the wolf inside her lean toward it like a flower toward sunlight. She stepped over the threshold. The moment her bare feet touched the hallway carpet, power rippled over her skin like static. Finlay's nostrils flared. Approval and hunger, and something dangerously close to awe flickered across his face. He turned, coat brushing her arm, as he led her the 10 steps to the fire escape window at the end of the corridor. Pushed it open. Cold, clean air rushed in, carrying the faint promise of pine and distant mountains. Amie climbed out onto the rain-slick metal landing without hesitation. The city sprawled beneath her, oblivious and glittering, but above the rooftops, the sky had cleared just enough for a single slice of moon to cut through the clouds, sharp as a wolf's fang. She closed her eyes and breathed. And for the first time in 3 years, the wolf inside her breathed with her. Finlay stood behind her, close enough that she felt the heat of him along her spine, not touching, never touching without permission, but there. Solid, real. A mountain that had chosen to stand at her back. "Feel that?" he murmured against the shell of her ear, voice barely louder than the wind. "That's yours. Always was." Amie opened her eyes and stared at the moon until it burned. When she finally turned to face him, her voice didn't shake at all. "Show me the way home, Finlay Blackthorn." His slow, fierce smile was the most beautiful danger she had ever seen. Chapter 4. The first howl she ever owned. The forest smelled like resurrection. Blackthorn Ridge rose sharp and sudden from the lowlands, a spine of granite and ancient pine that clawed at the sky. The moment the truck tires left asphalt and bit into dirt, Amie felt the land reach up through the soles of her boots and wrap around her bones like it had been waiting. Finlay drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the back of her seat. Never on her, never without permission, but close enough that the heat of his forearm brushed the ends of her hair every time the truck swayed. Moonlight slid over the hard lines of his profile, painting silver across the scar on his cheekbone, turning his eyes into chips of winter sky. They hadn't spoken in an hour. There was no need. The air between them was already crowded with scent and heartbeat, and the low, constant thrum of her wolf pacing beneath her skin, impatient, ravenous, gloriously awake. The road narrowed, climbed, twisted until the city lights vanished and only stars remained. Then the trees opened into a high meadow, ringed by standing stones older than any pack law. Torches burned in iron brackets, throwing gold across wolves who waited in silence. 20, 30, maybe more. All turned toward the truck as it rolled to a stop. Finlay cut the engine. The sudden hush pressed against her eardrums. He turned to her. "You step out when you're ready. No one moves until you do." Amie swallowed. Her hands were steady, but everything inside her trembled on the edge of becoming. She opened the door, and the night rushed in. Cold, pine-sweet, electric. Bare feet on frost-dusted grass. The pack's collective inhale tasted her the way wolves taste wind, and she felt the moment they realized what she was. Latent no longer. Something wilder. Finlay came around the hood, coat unbuttoned now, shirt dark against the torchlight. He stopped 3 paces away, always 3, always giving her space to choose, and tilted his head toward the center of the meadow. A single slab of black stone waited there, veined with silver, slick with moonlight. The awakening stone. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. The pack formed a loose circle, leaving a path straight to it. No one spoke. No one needed to. The air itself bowed. Amie walked. Every step sent sparks up her calves. The grass was sharp with frost, but the cold felt like welcome. Her wolf surged so hard she stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Breath plumed white in front of her. The torches blurred into streaks of fire. She reached the stone and laid both palms on it. The world cracked open. Power poured into her like molten starlight. Down her throat, through her veins, into the marrow of every bone she'd ever broken, trying to be less. Her spine arched. A sound tore out of her. Not a scream, not a cry. Something older, something that belonged to the ridge itself. Silver fur exploded across her skin in a rush of agony and ecstasy. Bones rearranged with wet, beautiful violence. The night tilted, sharpened, flooded with scent and sound and color she'd never dreamed existed. She landed on 4 paws in the frost, larger than she had any right to be, coat shimmering like moonlight made solid. Her first breath as wolf tasted of pine and blood and freedom. A roar went up from the pack, joy, fierce and primal. They dropped to their knees as one, heads bowed, throats bared in instinctive submission to the wolf who had just torn herself free of every chain ever forged for her. Amie threw her head back and howled. The sound cracked the sky. It rolled down the ridge, rattled the torches, shook stars loose from the heavens. Every wolf in the circle answered, some with voices, some with tears, until the night itself seemed to sing her name. She felt Finlay before she saw him. He walked through the kneeling pack as though the world had paused just for him. When he reached her, he went to one knee in the frost, coat pooling around him like spilled ink. His eyes, river blue, fierce, reverent, never left hers. Slowly, deliberately, he bowed his head and exposed the strong column of his throat. The gesture stole what little breath she had left. Alpha submitting to her. Not because she'd beaten him, because she was magnificent. Amie shifted back without thinking, fur receding, bones folding, skin sliding over muscle until she knelt naked and trembling in the grass. Moonlight painted her in silver and shadow. Every scar, every curve, every inch of the woman the moon had waited 21 years to claim. Finlay's coat was around her shoulders before the first shiver hit. The weight of it was enormous, warm with his scent, heavy with the promise that no one would ever look at her body and find it lacking again. His hands hovered at her waist, not quite touching, waiting. She looked up at him. Tears tracked clean lines through the frost on her cheeks. "I felt her die that night," she whispered, voice raw from the shift. "I felt her die when he said I was empty." Finlay's jaw flexed. He was wrong. Amie rose on shaking legs. The coat fell to mid-thigh, sleeves swallowing her hands. She lifted one of those sleeves to his face and pressed her palm to the hard line of his cheek. "I know that now." The meadow held its breath. She stepped into him, bare feet between his boots, forehead against the steady thump of his heart, and let the coat and his arms and the entire watching pack witness the moment she chose to belong again. Finlay's exhale trembled against her temple. His arms came around her slowly, carefully, as though she were made of wildfire and dawn. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough enough to scrape bone. "There you are," he breathed into her hair. "There you are, little storm." Above them, the moon burned brighter than it ever had over Silver Hollow, and for the first time in her life, it looked like it was smiling. Chapter 5. Firelight and Almost Kisses. The training grounds lay in a hollow cupped by the ridge, ringed by torches that hissed and spat against the night. Sparks rose in frantic spirals, dying against a sky so thick with stars it felt close enough to touch. Amie rolled her shoulders, feeling the new weight of muscle and power that had settled into her bones like it had always belonged there. 3 weeks since the awakening stone. 3 weeks of running until her lungs burned clean, of learning the taste of elk blood and midnight snow, of discovering that her wolf was not silver, but white shot through with threads of molten gold. Rare, dangerous, beautiful in the way storms are beautiful. Across the packed earth circle, Finlay waited. He had shed his coat hours ago. The firelight painted bronze across the ridges of his chest, the hard cut of his abdomen, the ink-black lines of the pack tattoo that curled over his heart and disappeared beneath the waistband of his low-slung pants. Sweat gleamed on his skin. Every breath lifted the heavy muscle of his back like wings. He crooked a finger. Amie's lips curved. She moved. They came together fast, no ceremony, no warning, just the sudden collision of bodies that knew exactly how much force the other could take. Her forearm blocked his strike. His knee glanced off her thigh. They spun, breath mingling, heat shared. Every impact sang through her blood like music. He caught her wrist, twisted, tried to flip her. She flowed with it, used his momentum, and suddenly his back hit the ground, with her straddling his hips, forearm pressed to his throat, hair falling in a wild curtain around them both. The pack, watching from the edges, whooped and howled approval. Finlay's eyes blazed up at her, river blue gone almost black with hunger. His pulse thundered beneath her palm, fast, but not from exertion. "Yield?" she asked, voice husky from the fight. His slow grin was all predator. "Never." He surged up. The world flipped. Suddenly, she was the one on her back, wrists pinned above her head in one of his large hands, his weight a delicious cage between her thighs. Torchlight flickered over the sharp cut of his cheekbones, the scar that pulled when he smiled like that. Amie's breath left her in a rush that had nothing to do with being winded. Finlay leaned down until his lips hovered a whisper from hers. "Got you, little storm." She arched, just enough that her breasts brushed his chest, and watched his pupils blow wide. "Did you?" she murmured. With a twist of hips and a surge of power that still startled her, she reversed them again, this time pinning him face down, her knees digging into the dirt on either side of his ribs, one hand fisted in the back of his hair. The position pressed the length of her body along his spine. She felt the shudder that rolled through him like distant thunder. The pack roared louder, half laughter, half awe. Amie lowered her mouth to the shell of his ear. "Yield, Alpha?" His answering growl vibrated through her bones. "Make me." She laughed, low, wild, free, and let him feel her teeth graze the tendon at the base of his neck, not breaking skin, just the promise of it. The sound he made was raw enough to scorch the air. They stayed like that, frozen in dominance and surrender, until the fire cracked and sent a shower of sparks skyward. Only then did she release him. Finlay rolled to his feet in one fluid motion, chest heaving, eyes never leaving her face. He offered a hand. She took it. The moment their palms met, the pack quieted, sensing the shift from spar to something far more dangerous. He pulled her up slowly, deliberately, until she stood flush against him. Sweat-slick skin to sweat-slick skin, heartbeat crashing against heartbeat. The torchlight painted gold across the sweat at her collarbone, the curve of her hip, the place where his thumb now rested just beneath the hem of her cropped tank. Amie tilted her head back to hold his stare. The space between their mouths was less than a breath. She could taste him already, pine and smoke and want. Finlay's voice came out gravel and smoke. "You fight like you were born for war." "I was born for more than that," she whispered. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered, returned to her eyes with visible effort. "I know." The fire popped again, louder. Someone in the circle coughed. Reality tried to intrude. Neither of them moved. His thumb traced a slow, burning line along the strip of bare skin above her waistband. Once. Twice. A question asked with touch alone. Amie answered by rising onto her toes, letting her lips hover a hair's breadth from his. Close enough that every exhale became shared air. Close enough that she felt the tremor he fought to hide. "Finlay," she breathed, his name a spark against his mouth. His grip tightened, almost bruising. "Say it again." "Finlay." He made a sound low in his throat, half groan, half prayer. And then his forehead dropped to rest against hers. The smallest surrender, the largest victory. Around them, the pack had gone utterly still, sensing the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Amie closed her eyes and let herself feel it all. The heat pouring off his skin, the tremor in the arms that caged her without trapping her, the way his scent wrapped around her wolf and called it home. She felt the bond that wasn't fate but choice, stronger, cleaner, forged in fire and respect, and nights like this. She also felt the moment he decided not to kiss her. His breath shook against her lips. "Not here," he rasped. "Not like this. When I take your mouth the first time, little storm, there'll be no audience, no torches, just you, me, and the moon as witness." The promise in those words slid down her spine like heated silk. Amie let her fingers trace the line of his jaw, the stubble rasping deliciously against her skin. "Then take me somewhere the moon can see." Finlay's eyes flared bright, feral blue. He bent, swept her up against his chest as easily as if she weighed nothing, and strode out of the circle. The pack parted like water. Torches blurred into streaks of gold. Behind them, someone started a low, rhythmic howl that built and built until the entire ridge answered. Celebration, warning, benediction. Amie wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against the strong column of his throat, breathing him in as he carried her into the dark. The firelight faded. The almost kiss lingered on her lips like a brand. And somewhere deep inside her chest, her wolf stretched, sated and hungry all at once, whispering a single word against the cage of her ribs. More. Chapter 6. The ritual that showed her the truth. The blood moon hung low and swollen, so close it felt like the ridge itself had tilted to drink from it. Tonight, the blackthorn pack gathered in the oldest circle, the one carved into bedrock before language had names for grief or mate or mercy. A ring of standing stones rose like broken teeth around a shallow basin filled with embers that breathed red light upward in slow, hypnotic pulses. Amie stood at the edge, barefoot again, wearing nothing but a sleeveless dress the color of midnight. The fabric clung to every new curve her wolf had sculpted into her body, and the wind kept lifting the hem just enough to tease the firelight across her thighs. She felt every stare, some reverent, some hungry, all aware that the latent girl had become something the stories had never quite prepared them for. Finlay waited at the center, shirtless, skin painted with ash and crushed rowan berries in the ancient spiral that marked an alpha offering his truth to the moon. The firelight loved him. It licked along the ridges of muscle, slid over the blackthorn tattoo that now seemed to writhe with a life of its own, and pooled in the hollow of his throat like liquid gold. He did not look at her yet. He was waiting for the drums. They began low, heartbeat slow, then built, skin on skin, bone on bone, until the sound lived inside her chest and made her blood sing. One by one, the pack stepped into the circle, shedding clothes, shedding names, until wolves and humans moved as one living shadow around the embers. Only then did Finlay's eyes find hers. River blue turned almost black under the red moon. He lifted one hand, palm up, fingers curled in summons. The gesture was simple, ancient, undeniable. Amie walked the path they opened for her. Each footfall on warm stone sent sparks up her calves. The drums quickened. The closer she came, the louder her wolf howled inside her skin, frantic, joyous, terrified. She stopped one breath away from him. Heat rolled off his body in waves. The scent of rowan and smoke and raw, barely leashed want wrapped around her so completely she swayed. Finlay spoke first, voice pitched for her ears, alone beneath the thunder of drums. "The moon shows us threads tonight. Fate, choice, truth." His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, returned. "Whatever we see, little storm, it changes nothing between us unless you want it to." The honesty in those words cracked something open inside her chest. She lifted her hand and laid it over the ash spiral on his chest. His heart slammed against her palm, once, twice, then steadied, as if her touch alone could calm an alpha's storm. The pack began to chant, low, wordless, rising. The embers flared crimson. Smoke curled upward in thick, deliberate ropes that caught the moonlight and turned silver. Finlay threaded his fingers through hers and pulled her the final step, until her bare toes touched his, until her breasts brushed the heat of his chest with every breath, until the space between their mouths was nothing but shared air and trembling restraint. He bent his head until his lips grazed the shell of her ear. "Look up," he whispered. She did. The smoke had become a mirror. Threads of light, gold, silver, crimson, wove through it like living constellations. Some thick and unbreakable, some fragile as spider silk. Mate bonds, blood bonds, bonds of choice and sacrifice and longing. Amie's breath stopped. She saw herself at the center, a blazing white gold star brighter than any other. Threads exploded outward from her heart in every direction. One thread, thick, ancient, golden, shot straight across mountains and years to a place she refused to name. It pulsed, angry and wounded, but alive. Unbroken. James. The sight punched the air from her lungs. Another thread, silver shot through with blackthorn shadows, rose from Finlay's chest and reached for hers. It was strong, steady, forged rather than faded, and it wrapped around her star like ivy claiming stone. Not weaker. Different, chosen, but it stopped just short of touching her core. Not mate. The realization sliced deeper than she expected. Finlay's hand tightened around hers. He had seen it too. The smoke mirror wavered. More threads flickered, pack bonds, loyalty, love, future promises. But the two thickest remained, one pulling her backward into the past, one anchoring her here, now, in the arms of a man who was not her fate, yet looked at her like she was his entire world. The drums crashed into silence. The mirror dissolved into ordinary smoke. Amie's eyes burned. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see pity or triumph, or anything that would break her all over again. Finlay cupped her face with both hands, forcing her gaze up. Moonlight and ember glow painted tears across his own cheekbones, ash and salt, and something fiercer. "Listen to me," he said, voice rough as splintered oak. "Fate is a coward's excuse. I have watched that thread reach for you every night since I found you, and every night I have chosen to stand between you and anything that would drag you back to pain." His thumbs wiped the tears from her cheeks with a tenderness that destroyed her. "I am not your mate," he continued, low and fierce, "but I am yours, in every way that matters, in every way you'll let me be, and if the moon itself tries to take you from me, I will tear it out of the sky." The words were blasphemy and salvation at once. Amie's hands came up to fist in the ash spirals on his chest. She rose onto her toes until their foreheads touched, until she could taste the rowan on his breath. "I see you too," she whispered against his lips, "and I choose you back. Every single day I wake up breathing, I'm choosing you." His exhale trembled. The arms that came around her were iron and refuge, Around them, the pack began to howl, not in sorrow, but in fierce, wild acceptance. The sound rose and fell like waves, washing the last of the smoke from the sky, until only the blood moon remained, huge and silent and suddenly irrelevant. Finlay's mouth brushed the corner of hers. Not a kiss, not yet. Just the softest graze of promise and possession. "Thread or no thread," he murmured, lips moving against her skin. "You are the only fate I want." Amie closed her eyes and let the howl inside her own chest answer his. The moon watched, ancient and unblinking, and for once it had nothing to say. Chapter 7. Border Nights and Unspoken Vows. The forest along the northern border was older than memory. Trees so tall, their trunks disappeared into darkness long before they reached the sky. Moonlight barely touched the ground here. It fell in thin silver blades that sliced through the canopy and died on the moss. Amie moved like a ghost between the trunks, barefoot, silent, her breath fogging in the pre-dawn chill. She wore only Finlay's black shirt, unbuttoned, hanging to mid-thigh. The sleeves rolled to her elbows, the scent of him still clinging to the fabric like a second skin. Her wolf prowled just beneath the surface, golden eyes reflecting every stray shard of light. Finlay walked 3 paces ahead, coat open, shoulders loose, but she felt the coiled readiness in every line of his body. They had come to mark the boundary stones before the first hint of sunrise, a ritual usually done in silence and solitude. Tonight, he had asked her to come. Tonight, he had not let her out of arm's reach for longer than a heartbeat. The attack came without warning. One moment, the forest breathed quiet. The next, it exploded into violence. 3 wolves burst from the undergrowth, rogues, lean and starved and desperate, teeth bared, eyes glowing sickly yellow. They went for Finlay first, recognizing Alpha, aiming to cripple the pack in one strike. Amie moved before thought. She shifted mid-leap, cloth shredding, bones singing, and landed between Finlay and the largest attacker in a blaze of white-gold fur. Her jaws closed around the rogue's throat with a precision that shocked even her. Hot blood flooded her tongue. She flung the body aside and spun to face the others. Finlay's roar shook the trees. He had already dispatched one. The third rogue hesitated, caught between 2 predators who moved like a single storm. Amie stalked forward, hackles raised, lips peeled back from fangs that still dripped crimson. The rogue whimpered and bolted. She let it go. Mercy tasted almost as good as vengeance tonight. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the wet thump of 2 bodies hitting moss. Finlay shifted back first, human again, chest heaving, blood streaking down one arm where claws had grazed him. His eyes were wild, pupils blown wide with adrenaline, and something darker. Amie followed a heartbeat later. The cold air kissed her bare skin, raising gooseflesh everywhere the shirt no longer covered. Blood cooled on her lower lip. She tasted copper and pine and the lingering heat of battle. Finlay stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You put yourself in front of me," he said, voice ragged. "I put myself beside you," she corrected, stepping over the corpse without looking down. "There's a difference." He closed the distance in 2 strides, hands cupping her face, thumbs smearing the blood at the corner of her mouth. His gaze searched hers, fierce, shaken, reverent. "I have never—" His voice cracked. He tried again. "In 237 years, no one has ever—" She cut him off by rising onto her toes and pressing her forehead to his. Their breath mingled, harsh, fast, alive. "I would burn the world before I let it take you from me," she whispered, repeating the words he had once given her under a different moon. Finlay made a sound, half laugh, half growl, and then his mouth was on hers. Not gentle, not tentative. A claiming born of terror and gratitude, and 3 weeks of almost kisses finally detonating into truth. He kissed her like a man who had watched her stand between him and death, and decided the universe had just rewritten its laws. His tongue swept against hers, tasting blood and battle and her, and she answered with teeth and tongue and a low moan that vibrated through both their chests. One of his hands slid into her hair, fisting, angling her head exactly where he wanted it. The other dropped to the small of her back, hauling her flush against him until she felt every hard line of him through the thin barrier of what remained of his shirt on her body. Amie's hands clawed at his shoulders, nails scoring skin, kneading him closer, needing to erase the memory of fangs aimed at his throat. She felt the shudder that rolled through him when her teeth grazed his lower lip. He broke the kiss only to drag his mouth along her jaw, down the column of her throat, open-mouthed and desperate, as if he could brand his scent into every inch of her skin. When he reached the place where neck met shoulder, he paused, breath scorching, body trembling with restraint. "Tell me to stop," he rasped against her pulse. "Tell me, and I will." Amie arched into him, fingers threading through his hair, guiding him exactly where instinct screamed he belonged. "Never," she breathed. His growl was pure possession. Teeth sank into the soft juncture of her neck. Not the mating bite, not yet. Just a claiming deep enough to mark, to bruise, to promise the rest when she was ready. Pleasure pain shot straight to her core. Her knees buckled. Finlay caught her, spun them, pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient pine. The tree was cold against her spine. He was fire against her front. One of his thighs slid between hers, pressing up, and she rode the hard muscle shamelessly, chasing the friction that made starbursts explode behind her eyelids. His name tore from her throat in a broken litany. His hand slid beneath the shirt, palm spreading over the bare skin of her waist, thumb tracing the curve just beneath her breast. Every touch was reverence and ruin. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads still pressed together, breath ragged, the sky had begun to pale at the edges. Finlay's voice was wrecked. "I meant to wait, meant to give you time, give you slow." "I don't want slow," she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones like destiny finally catching up. "I want you, every way, every day, starting now." His eyes flared bright, feral blue. He lifted her again, effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her deeper into the trees, away from blood and death and border stones, toward a place where dawn had not yet learned their names. Behind them, the forest held its breath and kept their secret. Ahead, the first pale streak of gold touched the horizon, and Amie smiled against Finlay's throat, tasting salt and pine, and the future she had chosen with her teeth and her heart and her own fierce, unbroken hands. Chapter 8. The games where old ghosts wear new crowns. The pack games opened beneath a sky the color of fresh bruises. 10,000 wolves filled the vast amphitheater carved into the heart of the neutral mountains, banners snapping in a wind that smelled of iron and anticipation. Torches burned cold blue along the ridges, and every torch flame leaned toward the center ring, as though the fire itself wanted a better look. Amie walked the blackthorn procession path, with her chin high and her wolf blazing white gold beneath her skin. She wore the pack's colors now, black leather traced with living silver thread that caught the light like moonlight on water. The vest laced tight across her chest, the pants rode low on her hips, and every inch of exposed skin carried faint bruises shaped like Finlay's mouth from the night they had finally stopped pretending there was anything slow left between them. He walked half a step behind her left shoulder, alpha deference to the woman who had become the beating heart of his pack. His hand rested, light but possessive, at the small of her back. Every wolf they passed felt the weight of that touch and lowered their eyes, until the silver hollow banners appeared, crimson and silver, proud and merciless, until James Calder stepped into the torchlight. He had changed, harder, older. The boy who had shattered her under a gentler moon was gone. In his place stood a man carved from the same granite as the mountains, shoulders broader, jaw sharper, eyes the color of winter gold gone molten, with something that looked painfully like starvation. When his gaze found her across the sea of wolves, the broken bond between them flared. White-hot, vicious, alive. Amie's step faltered. Finlay's hand pressed once, steady, grounding, then slid away. Not abandonment, trust. She kept walking. James moved at the same moment, drawn by the same invisible thread. The crowd parted like water around a blade. They met in the neutral center of the arena, 10 feet of packed earth, and 3 years of silence between them. Up close, the damage was worse. His scent slammed into her, pine and frost, and the exact shade of heartbreak she had tried to outrun. The bond clawed at her ribs, demanding, begging, remembering the shape of his hands before they had ever learned cruelty. James's throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse or restraint. Amie. One word. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a curse. She lifted her chin. Calder. His eyes flicked over her. The new muscle, the blackthorn colors, the faint claiming marks blooming along her collarbone, and something raw and furious flickered across his face. He stopped, swallowed. You shifted. The disbelief in his tone scraped her raw. Yes. She let her wolf rise just enough for gold to flood her irises. Turns out I wasn't empty, just waiting for a pack that wasn't afraid of what I might become. James flinched, as though she had struck him. Behind her, Finlay's presence was a wall of heat and power, silent but unmistakable. James's gaze cut to him, assessing, measuring, then returned to her with something dangerously close to desperation. I felt it, he said lower. Every night for 3 years. I felt you wake up, felt you run, felt you— His voice cracked. Felt him touch what was mine. Amie stepped forward until only a handspan separated them. Close enough to see the tremor in his jaw, the pulse hammering at his throat, the faint scar that had not been there before. 3 parallel lines across his left pectoral, healed silver. I was never yours, she said, soft enough that only he heard the steel beneath the silk. You made that choice for both of us the night you called me empty. You don't get to crawl back now because the moon finally showed you what you threw away. His hand lifted, slow, shaking, stopping just short of her cheek. I was wrong, he rasped. I was cruel, and I was wrong, and I have paid for it every single day since— Don't! The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare ask for forgiveness wrapped in pretty pain. You don't get to stand here in your father's colors and tell me you suffered while I learned how to breathe again. James's eyes glistened. Actual tears, held back by will alone. I never stopped. You stopped the moment you turned your back, she cut in, and I started living the moment I walked away. The bond between them screamed, pulling so hard her sternum ached. She felt Finlay shift behind her, not jealousy, just readiness. But this moment belonged to her and the ghost who had once worn her future. James dropped to one knee. The entire amphitheater went deathly still. He bowed his head, exposed his throat. Alpha's son, heir to Silver Hollow, offering submission to the woman he had rejected in front of half those same wolves 3 years ago. I yield the past, he said, voice carrying to the highest seats. I yield my pride. I yield every claim I forfeited the night I broke you, but I will not yield the games, not while there's still a chance to earn back even a fragment of what I destroyed. Amie stared down at the proud line of his neck and felt the old wound split open and bleed. Slowly, deliberately, she crouched until they were eye to eye. Look at me, she said. He did. Gold on gold. You want redemption? Her voice was quiet, deadly. Then survive me in that ring. Survive him. She tilted her head toward Finlay. Survive what I've become without you. And when the dust settles, maybe, I'll let you speak my name again. She rose, turned her back the way he once had, and walked away without looking back. Finlay fell into step beside her, shoulder brushing hers, silent and proud, and hers. As they passed beneath the blackthorn banner, he leaned in just enough for his lips to graze the shell of her ear. I have never been more in love with you than I am right now, he murmured. Amy's smile was sharp enough to cut moonlight. "Good," she said, "because the games start at dawn, and I plan to make them both bleed before I decide who deserves to stay standing." The torches flared higher. The bond howled. And somewhere deep inside her chest, the wolf who had once been told she was empty bared her teeth at the entire world and roared. Chapter 9. The truth sharp enough to bleed. The sun was a hammer, and the arena was the anvil. Heat shimmered above the sand in visible waves, warping the air until the banners overhead looked like living flames. Every breath tasted of scorched earth and old blood. 3 days of brutal trials had left the ground scarred with claw marks and footprints, and the scent of exhaustion clung to every wolf in the stands. Blackthorn and Silver Hollow were deadlocked. One final trial remained. The trial of truth. No weapons, no shifting. Only 2 wolves and the moon's merciless gaze. Amie stepped over the chalked line first. The leather of her boots had been stripped away hours ago. She walked barefoot now, feeling every grain of sand bite into her soles like tiny accusations. The sleeveless black top she wore clung to her sweat-slick skin, silver runes catching fire with every breath. Her hair was braided tight against her skull, the tail whipping against her spine like a living thing. Across the circle, James waited. He looked carved from the same sun that was trying to kill them both. Bronze skin, gold eyes, blood drying in dark streaks across his ribs where her claws had kissed him in an earlier round. His chest rose and fell in controlled, brutal rhythm. The broken bond between them pulsed like a second heartbeat, louder than the crowd, louder than the drums that had fallen silent. 10,000 wolves held their breath. The presiding elder, ancient, scarred, voice like grinding stone, sliced her own forearm with a single claw. Blood hissed as it hit the sand. "Speak only truth," she rasped. "The moon is listening. Lies will burn flesh from bone." Silence crashed down so completely that Amie heard the thud of James's pulse across the circle. She spoke first. "Why?" One word. 3 years of nights soaked in that single question. James's jaw flexed. The gold of his eyes flickered. Pain, shame, something that looked like surrender. "Because I was a coward," he said, and the confession tore out of him like a blade dragged upward through his own ribs. "My father stood behind me that night with the council watching. He told me a latent mate would be the end of Silver Hollow. That rival packs were already sharpening their teeth on our borders. That if I claimed you, they would strip us of rank, of territory, of everything we'd bled for." His voice cracked open, raw and bleeding for the entire world to hear. "I believed strength meant sacrificing what I loved most to save the rest. I thought if I severed the bond fast enough, the pain would cauterize. I thought—" He laughed, a broken sound. "I thought I could live with half a soul if it kept the pack breathing." He dropped to his knees in the blistering sand. "I was wrong. About everything." The words hung in the furnace air, brutal and naked. Amie felt them strike every scar he had ever left on her. Some visible, most carved deep where no one could see. Her hands shook. She curled them into fists until claws pricked her palms and blood dripped between her fingers. "You let them watch me break," she said, voice low, lethal, carrying to the highest seats. "You let your father smile while I bled on that stone. Do you know what empty did to me, James? Do you know how many nights I woke up choking on the word because it was the last thing my mate ever called me?" He bowed forward until his forehead nearly touched the sand, shoulders shaking with the force of holding himself together. "I felt every second," he rasped. "Every tear you never let fall. Every mile you ran. Every morning you woke up and chose to keep breathing without me. I felt it all, Amie, and I deserved every lash." She stepped closer. The heat rolling off him reached her like a plea. She did not stop until only a handspan separated them, close enough to see the new scars across his chest, the faint tremor in his arms, the tears cutting clean paths through the blood and dust on his face. "I hated you," she whispered, soft enough that only he heard the tremor beneath the steel. I hated you so much, I built an entirely new life on the ashes of us. And then, I learned how to love again. Someone who never asked me to be less in order to keep him safe. James lifted his head. Gold eyes shattered wide open. I don't want forgiveness, he said, voice raw and steady. I want you free of me, free of the lie I forced you to carry. I want you to stop wearing my cowardice like armor, even if it kills me, Amie. Be free. The bond between them screamed, golden, frayed, still unbreakable. And for the first time in 3 years, Amie felt it begin to loosen its death grip on her heart. She crouched until they were eye to eye, until she could see every fleck of amber in his irises, every regret he would carry to his grave. I was never yours to free, she said, soft and deadly. But I release you anyway. The girl who loved you died that night on the stone. The woman standing here doesn't need your permission to live. She rose, turned her back, exactly the way he once had, and walked straight into Finlay's arms. He caught her like gravity had always meant her for him, hands sliding into her hair, mouth claiming hers in a kiss that tasted of salt and fire and victory. He kissed her slow and deliberate and possessive, right there beneath the burning sun, in front of 10,000 witnesses, and the man who had once owned her future. The roar that went up from the crowd shook the stands. When they broke apart, Finlay's forehead rested against hers, breath ragged, eyes blazing. You okay, little storm? He murmured, voice only for her. She smiled, sharp, radiant, gloriously free. I have never been more okay in my life. Behind them, James rose slowly. Blood dripped from his clenched fists onto the sand, but his shoulders were straighter than they had been in years. He met Finlay's gaze over her head. No challenge, only acknowledgement. Then he looked at Amie one last time. Thank you, he said, voice steady now, clear enough for the moon itself to hear, for surviving me. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The elder raised her blood-soaked arm to the sky. Truth has been spoken, she declared. The moon is satisfied. A roar exploded from the crowd, some in grief, most in awe. Blackthorn banners snapped overhead as the final point was awarded, not for blood spilled, but for truth bared. Amie turned her face into the warm hollow of Finlay's throat and breathed him in, cedar and snow and home. Behind her, the broken bond finally went quiet. And deep inside her chest, her wolf lifted her proud white gold head to the merciless sun and howled, not in pain, not in rage, but in pure, unapologetic triumph. The girl who had once been told she was empty had just rewritten fate with nothing but her own fierce, unbreakable truth, and the entire world had watched her do it. Chapter 10. The moon that finally chose her. The final night of the games arrived soft as forgiveness. No torches, no drums. Only the high meadow above the arena, blanketed in fresh snow that swallowed sound and turned the world into something hushed and sacred. The sky was a deep velvet black, pierced by a moon so bright it felt close enough to touch. Full, perfect, luminous, with a promise older than bloodlines or broken bonds. Amie stood barefoot at the center of the clearing, dressed in nothing but a thin silver shift that clung to every curve the moon had sculpted into her over these wild, reclaimed years. Snowflakes melted against her collarbones, her throat, the places Finlay had kissed into memory only hours ago. Her hair spilled loose down her back, white gold strands catching moonlight until she looked like a living star. Finlay waited 10 paces away, coat open, breath clouding in the frigid air. His eyes never left her, river blue gone soft and reverent. Behind him, James stood at the edge of the tree line, no longer rival, no longer enemy, just witness. The broken bond between them had quieted to a faint golden scar across her heart. Pain remembered, but no longer pain that ruled. The elders had declared a draw. Blackthorn and Silver Hollow would share the highest rank for the first time in history. But the moon, ancient and impartial, had demanded one final ritual before the new order could be sealed. A choosing, not of mates, of queen. Amie lifted her face to the sky and felt the moon answer, not with force, but with welcome. Power poured down in a column of liquid silver, wrapping around her like silk, sinking through skin and bone until her wolf rose in a blaze of white gold fire beneath her ribs. She inhaled once, sharp, steady, and spoke the words the moon itself seemed to place on her tongue. I claim dominion. The clearing trembled. Snow lifted from the ground in swirling spirals, dancing around her like a coronation gown made of starlight. Every wolf for miles felt the shift in the air, the moment the world tilted and found its new axis. Finlay was moving before the echo of her voice faded. He crossed the snow in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, alpha, ancient, unbreakable, and bowed his head. "My queen," he said, voice rough with awe and love and surrender. One by one, the hidden watchers followed, blackthorn wolves stepping from the trees, Silver Hollow beside them, until the meadow was ringed with bowed heads and bared throats. Even James sank slowly to his knees, eyes shining with something that looked like peace. Amie's heart swelled so fiercely she thought it might burst. She stepped forward and laid her hand on Finlay's bowed head, fingers threading through dark hair still dusted with snow. "Rise, my heart," she whispered. He did, slowly, reverently, and when he straightened, she rose onto her toes and kissed him, soft, deliberate, endless. The bond between them, no longer silver thread, but living fire, blazed bright enough to rival the moon. His arms came around her like homecoming, lifting her until her feet left the snow, and the world narrowed to nothing but the taste of him, the scent of him, the steady thunder of his heart against hers. When they finally broke apart, foreheads still touching, breath mingling in soft clouds, he smiled, slow, fierce, utterly hers. "Tell me what you want, little storm," he murmured against her lips. "Name it, and it's yours." Amie turned in the circle of his arms to face the kneeling packs, past and future woven together in the snow. "I want unity," she said, voice carrying on the still air like bells. "I want no more latents shamed, no more bonds broken for politics. I want every wolf who ever felt empty to stand in a circle like this and hear the moon call them magnificent." She looked at James then, really looked, and found him smiling through tears. "And I want forgiveness," she added softly. "Not for them. For me. For the girl who needed to hate before she could love this fiercely." James rose, walked forward until he stood an arm's length away. Then he placed his fist over his heart and bowed. Deep, formal, final. "You have it," he said. "You always did." The snow began to fall harder, thick, gentle flakes that caught in lashes and melted on warm skin. Amie reached out and pulled James into the embrace she shared with Finlay. 3 bodies, 2 packs, 1 future. James's arms came around her hesitantly, then fiercely, and for one trembling moment, the past dissolved in the simple, human warmth of bodies that had survived each other. When they stepped apart, the moon hung huge and perfect above them, bathing the meadow in approval. Finlay brushed a snowflake from her cheek, thumb lingering. "Marry me under this moon," he said, quiet, but every wolf heard. Not as Alpha and Luna, as Finlay and Amie, as equals, as chosen. Amie laughed, bright, wild, free. And the sound echoed off the mountains like birds taking flight. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her again, deeper this time, claiming and claimed, while the packs around them began to howl, soft at first, then rising into a song that shook the stars. Snow kept falling, the moon kept shining, and somewhere in the heart of that perfect, endless night, the girl who had once been told she was empty opened her arms to the sky and felt the universe pour itself into her like she had always been its missing piece. The wolf inside her threw back her head and sang. One clear, perfect note that held every name she had ever been. Rejected. Latent. lost. Found, queen. And the moon, ancient, wise, finally satisfied, answered with light so bright it felt like love made visible. This was the night the moon finally chose her, and she chose it back. The end.